stay on that one.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And today we have our Professor Ira Gardner as our brown bag speaker. He will talk about a very exciting topic, EIDOS, the role visual media takes in shaping contemporary culture. So he will talk about the influence photography and visual media is having on contemporary culture, and we will also discuss his recent publication projects. So it's very excellent that he has a publication in the new quarterly journal titled EIDOS. As you can see from our email notice that it's a very beautiful. I just fall in love with this cover page once I see it. And also he will talk about the work of several international artists. He's very caring about the teaching. So Ira will tell us how what is the role of the publishing plays in cultivating students' success in the classroom. So it's a topic covers so many different aspects of the interesting directions, and we are very excited to have Ira. And Ira said he knows everybody, so we don't need to introduce ourselves to him.
Yeah, I got to meet you for last week.
Let's start.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I think my goal is, first of all, to talk about how photography does play a significant role in our culture today, and why I think we need to hit the pause button. And I want to ultimately finish up with how I'm incorporating that pause for reflection with my classes and my students, and also engaging them in that process as well. So to begin with, I thought about, I'm going to make this part rather easy because I actually developed a little presentation about why I did this that says it better than I could in person anyway. So I'm just going to play this really quickly, assuming that this works. There we go. I use YouTube a lot. It's what I've been passionate about my entire life, and I'm more excited about today than ever. I was walking around Manhattan Beach last summer, and I heard a girl shout out, "I'll kiss you if you jump." And I immediately had to bring my camera to my eye and see what was happening and tell that story. I think photography at its best does what great literature does. It doesn't just mark time, but deepens our understanding of it. Approximately 80% of everything we perceive in the world comes through our perception through sight. Most of us have not seen the pyramids, but we know about the pyramids through photographic imagery. The majority of our understanding of the world comes through photographic images. So the brain processes images and forms an understanding of the world. Well, when we think about the sheer volume of photographic imagery that is both produced and consumed in our culture, there is approximately over 200,000 images uploaded to social media every minute. Last year alone, there was approximately 880 billion photographic images produced. And the way human culture is shaped and formed is primarily through mimicry, through seeing something over and over and over and adopting attitudes and behaviors. The average American is bombarded with 2,000 to 3,000 photographic images related to advertising alone, and up to 10,000 images per day, depending upon how many hours of television. What does this all mean? How does photography influence our understanding of our world or ourselves? So I'm introducing a new quarterly journal about photography and culture titled EIDOS. The word EIDOS means the shape or form that ideas take. And I thought that was an appropriate name because of the role that photography plays in forming culture. We use photography to create meaning in our lives. we document virtually every moment and share it with others to say, this is my life. So I started looking at how technology was beginning to impact our expectations and our behaviors. And I started paying attention to advertising media that was advertising all this new digital photography technology, where the expectation was that you would not only produce an image, but you would immediately retouch it, you would immediately transmit it, and the time lapse between the making an image, thinking about what you're doing, and publishing it has shrunk down to zero. We now instinctively or almost habitually just pull out a cell phone and snap a photo and share it. And I wanted to just hit that pause button and create this sort of philosophical gap for us to reflect on what it is we're actually doing and what this technology really means to us. I started accumulating some research as well as visual imagery that I think the goal is to kind of reawaken an awareness of what photography truly is, what the pushing the button means, and also with an idea of wanting to raise our appreciation for ourselves and our daily lives through photographic imagery. So that's just a little synopsis of what's kind of driven the process for me. But on the practical side, photography is anyway, from a practical aspect, photography plays a significant role in crime as testimony of facts. I actually received one of those red light tickets before, and they're amazingly accurate photographs of my face and driver's license. Photography extends our neurobiological process, as all tools do, and so it allows us to see things that are hidden from the naked eye. It also influences our economy. It determines our behavior, where we go on vacation, what hotel rooms we book are largely based upon photography. And as I said in the video, we're uploading billions of photos. And in fact, that's, you look at Instagram, and they're proud of the fact that if you stacked up all the photos, you'd have enough to go up to the top of the Empire State Building in 37 minutes, Mount Everest in 12 hours, and so on. But before the world of Facebook and Instagram, before current digital photography, the image was governed largely by painting and a controlled, privileged class. What I want to illustrate with this slide, too, is the immersion of photography even before we knew it as photography today, in that the image on the left is a painting made by a human eye that can see into highlights and into shadows because of the way our pupils constrict and dilate, as compared to the image on the right, which incorporated the use of optics, the camera obscura, that required contrasty lighting, and we start to see a photographic image emerge, photographic realism in painting. So prior to the consumer camera, imagery was pretty much centrally controlled. Look at all the imagery in churches that were designed to instruct and control or espouse a certain attitude and behavior within culture. So imagery is very much culture-based, and it continues to be so with photography as well. I'm going to skip some of this ahead because I can fill up 2 hours easily. With Kodak and the ubiquitous Brownie camera, all of a sudden images became controlled by the masses that would do candid photography. And we start to get a better idea of what culture is through the snapshot. What's interesting about photography and about images in general is there was this idea early on that we could know something about a person's personality by their appearance. And largely, even though most of this has been debunked, and I'm sure Saber can speak to that, we still hold this idea that we know somebody by what they appear like. And think about when you travel and go into a new place, how much of your fight or flight instincts are determined by what you see, right? So the power of the image is still in this idea that we know something. The essence of photography and its power is the fact that its subject matter is death, ultimately. That what was photographed in front of the lens has died or will die. Again, the idea of photography being introduced into evidence. But there's nothing new, and I guess that's the other thing that I try to, there's always a song in my head, and I always hear Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," and I want my students to understand there's nothing new about the way we collect images on Facebook and social media. The carte de visites back in the 1800s became a common, before there was Facebook, there were cabinet cards and calling cards with photographs. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that making a photograph was like printing money. And when we look at the sell price of historic baseball cards, they're nothing more than a likeness on a printed piece of paper going for millions of dollars. In America, the idea of celebrity is a rather new concept. Fame is based upon accomplishment, whereas here celebrity is based upon notoriety and being known. And there's nothing new here because you look at Madonna was done before with Marilyn Monroe. Lady Gaga is just the latest iteration. There's this archetype that exists in our culture that gets promoted through photographic imagery. We also consume these images and think we have some possessive quality over the likeness, such as looking at stars trying to reinvent themselves. We use photographs to create our persona, to create our public image, and we do so with our selfies. I'm here, I'm living the life, a dream life, right? And yet how often I just have a conversation that's more substantive that says, oh, there's a gap between what's presented in the photo. The two images on the right are most interesting. That's Miley Cyrus. The image on the right, far right, was taken by a famous photographer, Anna Leibovitz, who had to issue an apology after the publication of that image because Miley Cyrus was a Disney brand. And people were outraged that she'd be presented as a sexual being as she matured into adulthood. Again, nothing new. Ada Isaac Macon used photographs to create a stir and kind of built her career up as an aging star. She allowed herself to be photographed in nude colored stockings that made it appear very risque. She also allowed herself to be photographed touching the author Alexander Dumas, which also reinvigorated book sales for him as well. These were cultural taboos at the time that were broken and presented in a photographic image. Photographs have been used to sustain, promote ideas as well as sustain livelihoods. Sojourner Truth started out through public speaking engagements, talking about her life and getting her existence supported through those talks. It became more efficient to simply sell the cabinet cards and the idea that gets transmitted with the likeness. This image here is a very interesting image culturally because it is considered the first photographic image to help determine a presidential election, and I would argue defines what we typically hear in the media describe whether a candidate has a certain presidential gravitas. The reality is the photographer and Lincoln wrote about the manipulation that occurred during the making of this image. He had a long neck, the collar was pulled up, the sleeves pulled down, the pose was adjusted to make him look more presidential. He gave a speech in Cooper University in New York, and this image actually predates the halftone image of mass reproduction, had to be converted to an etching in order to be reproduced in newspapers up and down the eastern seaboard, but is largely credited with winning that election. This image here made Nixon look tough on Khrushchev. This is the famous kitchen debates. What's interesting about that is it turned around and the image bit him when a ironically youthful appearing Kennedy, who was actually very unhealthy, television audiences thought Kennedy clearly won the debate. Those that heard it on the radio thought Nixon clearly won the debate, and it's credited with being the last time an elected official or a candidate was willing to speak matter-of-factly or to think about a response directly. We now have this idea of staying on message and a scripted response. What's interesting about this is that the television crew that filmed the debate knew what they were doing. And in interviews, they talked about the fact that they knew after the first debate was over, they'd elected the next president because of how it was filmed. Photographs play a significant role in our culture, so much so that the Koch brothers are investing huge sums of money, because the reality is the candidates that spend the most typically win. Now, let's add to the fact that statistically in the last 30 years, the average soundbite of a presidential or a political candidate has been reduced from 90 seconds to 7 seconds. So what's filling up our attention? It's the photographic image. Also, photography relates to self-esteem. As a former commercial portrait photographer, one of the interesting psychological studies that we paid attention to was the fact that children who grow up in homes where there's photos prominently displayed of them have a higher self-esteem than those that have no visual narrative in the home. We develop myths, our heroes, and we get those myths recreated in the modern. All right? Take a look here at an interesting, what does it mean to be photographed in our culture? We've become a very voyeuristic society. I'm always fascinated what ads come up after the fact. Do you see what that image was right there that flashed on there? Very interesting visual world we live in. What's interesting, and I don't have time to go into it deeply at this point, is that most of our photographic images are heavily processed for us, not only through the selectivity of framing of what's there versus what's not there, but also with the digital imagery, there's a computer processing, and engineers process that image, and we're encouraged to experiment with different ways of interpreting raw data. We've also been told what is scenic, what is photogenic in our society. Also, the ad for the camera also presents us with what we consider cultural norms. That, again, that male safari hunter and the female fantasy presented, and these are actual camera ads. Take a look here at another ad. And this speaks to how much we interject the camera into our actual physical experiences. How many of us missed life in favor of the photographic image? Again, looking at photographic imagery and thinking about the exposure effect that normalizes what we see repeatedly. I call it the one-hit wonder song effect. That if you heard it playing on the radio enough, it became popular. And in fact, there were many scandals over DJs accepting bribes in order to play a song repeatedly because it normalizes it. So you imagine how I felt being a father of a son and getting this catalog here and wondering what gender roles are being presented. Photography is pretty interesting because it acts on our subconscious. Unlike other forms of language, there are linguistic qualities to photography, but unlike other languages that require great amounts of literacy to decode, we tend to not think about the fact that we receive the entire message visually, and it's fairly universal, and it acts upon our subconscious. our strongest desires. And then that's what the advertising industry has played on since post-World War II. And in fact, it was after looking at studying the propaganda of Germany that we developed the public relations industry in this country. Think about what is being sold here. What is the deeper meta-narrative of these images? If I buy a beer, I'm going to be surrounded with beautiful women. If I buy a Prius, I'm going to, have the land of wonderful social consciousness of fairies and all kinds of things. There's a lot of symbolism in these images, and again, looking at the image on the right, is that a photographic image? It's photographic, but it's not real. It's a virtual reality. And again, the symbolism of the white horse with the idea of replacing horsepower with electric power of the car. Again, looking at how we play kind of games visually here to inspire the idea of thinking what's beyond there. And I show this image because most advertising imagery is rooted in art history, because it's perceived, even people that don't have or own art, we perceive that the museum is a place of high culture. And so even though advertising is trying to reach us at a gut level, it's linking it to a high culture attitude and normalizing it. Again, kind of playing with that idea here. Photography has become, the lines have been blurred. Advertising and journalism have become blurred together. Advertising no longer deals with features and benefits of the products, but rather situations. And that's where I think there's a need for a literacy around imagery, because this is an eventless, this isn't a photojournalistic image. This is eventless, timeless, and it's really about selling clothes. And yet it seems real. I'm going to skip all this stuff. Visually, we can see the transformation of advertising being heavily text-based and illustration that required you to decipher and decode, to becoming about features and benefits and categories of products as opposed to brands, so to speak. But even then, you look at this early ad, and what is that telling you about the nuclear family culture of the 50s? And what are we doing? We're watching a clown on TV. Kind of interesting. And then it becomes about the attitude and envisioning yourself in that quality of life. And I always point out the difference between a portrait and a fashion shoot is that the model's really not looking at me, she's looking through me and presenting it as, I need to buy that product to be as good as. And we just started getting rid of the products altogether in some respects. It becomes about an idea, it becomes about a narrative. Imagery and advertising, we get sick of advertising, so we've decided to build ads into our other entertainment, such as movies and product placement. Think of all the Seinfeld episodes and the products that were sold through Seinfeld. Well, this is nothing new. It goes back to a Clark Gable movie, It Happened One Night, in which there was a scene that he couldn't pull an undershirt over his head without messing that perfect hair. So he didn't wear the undershirt, just unbuttoned, and it was scandalous. But all of a sudden, sales of t-shirts dropped dramatically, and the garment manufacturing industry went to Hollywood and complained. So then in his next movie, he ended up having a tank top with a wide neck that he could get over and remove it. Sales of tank top t-shirts went way up, right? So imagery directly affects attitudes and behaviors because of mimicry. So seeing James Bond drive a BMW helps sell BMWs. Advertisers wouldn't spend the millions of dollars on images if they didn't work. Again, look at the ideology being presented here to try to present this. This ad came out coinciding with Obama's campaign. Do you think there's any surprise that you have that model being the presenter, that the car is white and it's on a nice green grassy lawn with a forest behind it, irregardless of water issues pertaining to water usage on golf courses, irregardless of fuel consumption, and then look at the gender and ethnic balance of the audience as well. Corporate advertisers, there's no coincidence that the logo for Pepsi changed about the same time the Obama Hope campaign came out as well. You can see the similarities. So with that in mind, I also want to point out that digital photography is not new. It's much older than we thought. Back in '82, this magazine cover was altered digitally to move pyramids closer together. 1982. And again, what's interesting is the consequences of digital manipulation. This image by Brian Walsky of the LA Times was a composite image that he put together. It was discovered, and 8 years worth of his photographs had to be destroyed because they couldn't be deemed reliable. Photography is considered that important in terms of its powerful testimony of facts. Look at the manipulation of the O.J. Simpson covers on Newsweek and Time. These are magazines we used to expect to have a certain objective quality. Those lines between advertising, photojournalism, as well as political, have all been blurred through the use of photography. What's interesting about photography now is we have the ability to create photorealistic virtual realities that are embedded with lots of symbolism, and we don't have to accept mere physical reality any longer. So with that, I'm going to share a project that I did about 3 years ago, which actually led me to where I'm at today, and that is I got to work, actually it started over 10 years ago, I got to work on a collection of photographs that I thought were profound. And as a result of that, about 3 years ago, I was asked to be the lead for a grant to be an agent on behalf of an organization in Africa that resulted in a publication, and that got me down the road of developing more publications.
The notion of something, we call it in Ghana Sankofa. Sankofa is an idea that you take what is of value from the past and you use it to inform the future. The Bell Archive really is an embodiment of the Sankofa principle because there is so much of value represented in it. It's really a wonderful way to remind Ghanaians, of a valuable, not so distant past that is really well worth preserving.
As I started looking at both the contact sheets and the negatives, because I was able to, as we re-sleeve them, I could project them on the television screen and look at what the content of those negatives were. And I was mesmerized. It was the most heartwarming, interesting imagery of everyday people.
The wonderful thing about the collection is that it is so comprehensive. It's almost like this is a visual, sociological history of Ghana because it encompassed everything.
The first thing we did was we re-sleeved the imagery, and then we made contact sheets, new contact sheets to look at what the imagery was, and we decided, well, what are we going to do with this? And it seemed like a golden opportunity to put an exhibition together, so we wanted to make a series of prints that we could show here and then send back to Ghana for a public exhibition there. I started scanning the negatives and researching, well, how could we get back onto photographic paper? I did a lot of research on a technique where we could actually use inkjet transparency material to make an enlarged negative that I could then go into the dark room and contact print back on traditional photographic paper.
I hadn't seen Ira for many years at that point, but I had always wanted to bring back to him by way of saying thank you, you know, the catalog that had been developed in Accra between 2003 and 2009.
She said, you know, we've started this secondary support group called Friends of Opera in the United States, and our goal is to raise funds to build a children's playground and eventually build a permanent archive building for the collection. And we're having a meeting next week. Would you like to come? You know, it's nice to have an exhibition, but quite often most people can't afford to buy the exhibition prints. And so I've been researching ways to create products that people could purchase of small catalogs that were affordable. And we produced a 42-page catalog.
He traveled throughout the country, and he had a great deal of access, I would say, you know, because he was able to enter into spaces that not many people had the capacity to, certainly not many people from abroad, and there wasn't the kind of ubiquitous, you know, visual documentation you have today where everybody has a big digital camera. Willis was one of the few people who was able to document what was happening in Ghana visually.
We wanted to build a cultural event as part of a First Friday art walk tour. So we actually had live musicians, we had a children's art area, and then we had volunteers as acting as docents to explain the imagery.
Well, we've been enjoying it, and we noticed it's all children, so I guess that's serious play, where serious play comes in.
Beautiful, stunning work. The faces say it all. I like black and white photos because I think they show the emotions better in color.
If you look at the work, there's something so moving. I was almost brought to tears looking at this work, knowing where we started 10 years ago, and knowing the limitations of what we could do 10 years ago versus here we were today in less than 3 months putting this incredible publication together, incredible exhibition together, this incredible cultural event together with all these volunteers and you know, everybody just come together because of the power of these images and the story they have to tell is so compelling.
I like the fact that so many of the pictures are quiet and contemplative. You know, there's something quite wonderful about that notion of African children being creative and imaginative. You know, if you don't give children an environment in which they can reimagine and recreate their own societies, you're sort of setting them up for permanent dependence. So to me, you know, there has to be room for the development of children's minds at the same time as you are dealing with issues of survival.
I would hope that people that look at this collection would look around their everyday life and see the beauty of it, see those magic moments that occur in any setting. And it doesn't have to be some exotic place, it can be in your own neighborhood because you felt like you were invited in to this very intimate space in his neighborhood where he just lived.
What we do with the Bell collection supports the continuing development of the Bell archive in Ghana and, you know, as it's going international. The idea then was that we should see what we could do to use this collection to support the other work that Water Foundation is doing, most notably trying to put together an urban play space for children in Accra, which is something that really doesn't exist in the sense of, you know, a child-centered and intentionally designed space. So that's been a long-term goal of the foundation. The collection is now housed in a way that I feel is temporary, but nevertheless a lot better than it was at the beginning. Our foundation is using Melissa's old studio, which is not a very large space, but at least the negatives are filed, and there is, some temperature control there. It's reasonably stable, even though there's a great deal more work to be done.
So the last thing I want to share with you, and hopefully you can see the difference between those images and a lot of the images in contemporary American culture, and maybe see a little bit of the poetry of daily life. And I challenge my students to think about what it is they photograph, what it is they share and publicize on the internet through their own social media. What are they looking for? Because one of the challenges we have now is, when you got the newspaper, you were compelled to at least look at the headlines of things that you may or may not want to look at. But when you go to the internet to seek information, you pretty much get what you're looking for. And as one professor at Whitworth says, instead of getting the news that serves you, you get the news that entertains you. And that's a different way of dealing with it. So I'm trying to get students to think about that. And then I started thinking about, well, how can I incorporate the same methodology of publishing and inspiring reflection about photography in my classroom? So last quarter, we utilized research papers as a way to look back, that Sankofa, so to speak, look back to that wisdom, see that difference between the tools are changed, but functionality isn't. So I've started compiling and building publications out of my students' research. And it's allowed me to set a benchmark of a student has to achieve an 85% or higher to be included in it. But it also is making the scholarship feel like it applies towards something of value. And so I did the publication last quarter. Every student got a copy of it, so they actually got to walk away. Not only did I read their paper, but we had a composite. Canvas is a pretty neat tool. I know some people have mixed blessings with it. I really like it because I can incorporate video links into it. I can share stories in the multimedia component. But also, as you may have saw at the beginning there, I'm able to batch download all their submissions and utilize InDesign to lay out a booklet of their work. And as opposed to the cost of printed publications, I can distribute electronic copies that are suitable for their tablet computers that most students have these days. So that's kind of where I'm at with publishing and working with students as well on that. I've tried to keep it within our time frame. I'd like to open up for any comments or questions that you might have.
Just a comment, it's something I observed, and I'm not very observant about these things because I'm usually in my head doing sciencey stuff, but when my husband and I were at Glacier last summer, actually, we were at Prince of Wales Hotel, and that overlook over the lake where everybody takes pictures, and there was a group of tourists, young people, and they were all standing there taking selfies of themselves when there were others with them who could have taken a picture of them all together, and it's just, and I've been there before we had cell phones and selfies, and you said, hey, can you take my picture? And it was just so odd to me that they could have easily asked one of the others in their group, but they're just all here. It's just like, oh, but don't you want anybody else in the picture with you? But they don't take that picture. No, they didn't. They all took selfies. I mean,
I was recently hired to photograph the Bloomsday event. And I literally saw a person running with a selfie stick recording his entire run.
Oh my gosh.
Build up a lot of memory.
Yeah. It wasn't quite cherry to fire with an Olympic torch, but it was a pretty interesting commentary on our culture. Yeah. I mean, we've made it acceptable to have your cell phone out in a fine restaurant.
Right.
It's very interesting.
I thought it was interesting. You said later in your presentation that how much of life do you is while you're standing behind the camera. And that was what I thought when you started. You said you're at the dock and you heard the gal yell, "I'll kiss you if you jump." My thought was, I'm going to be able to jump. Your thought, pull up that camera.
You know, the only reason I felt comfortable making that photograph was because I was photographing in a place, Manhattan Beach, I'd been to a million times. And in fact, what's really interesting, the untold part of that story, is that I was actually there earlier in the morning doing commercial portraits. And they have a completely different look. I'm shooting at f2.8, I'm throwing the background focus, I'm photographing this romantic couple love story on the pier, there's all the crowds of people, how do I isolate them? But then later in the day, which was really fun because the couple took me to lunch, we were having a great time, and I'm walking around with an old 1960s Kodak Retina 3 camera loaded with black and white film, and it's a totally different purpose. And I'm pre-focused at hyperfocal distance, I've got extended depth, I'm like a spider with a web. Anything that happens within 5 feet to infinity, I've got sharp focus. And I'm looking at the semiotics of the situation. And I'm comfortable making that image because it's not new, it's very familiar. Most of my images are based on memory. I only pick up the camera in places that I am very comfortable with, I've been there, and I've had those life experiences. Even when I went to Paris a couple of years ago, I walked around for a couple of days before I picked up a camera. And in fact, I didn't make nearly as many photos as you might think because I'm not going to let the camera substitute for that actual experience. And I think that's kind of the challenge that most people have, is they're experiencing everything two-dimensionally through the viewfinder as opposed to three-dimensionally in real life. So I go back and I photograph New York, I go to San Francisco, to Valet, and I spend time there and get to know it, and then I go make photographs. So in the video where you saw the old man walking across, I made that photo because he reminded me of my grandfather, hunched over, who'd sold full of brushes. And it looked like Death of the Salesman, and I'm like, yeah, I know that. That's familiar to me. I'll make that image.
Yeah, I've heard a study a couple of times. I've heard about the study where they they studied the people who took the picture versus the ones who didn't, and the people tested them, and the people who hadn't taken the picture actually remembered what happened or the scene. I'll have to look that up somewhere, but they remembered it better than the people who took the picture. Right. The people taking the picture didn't remember.
What's interesting is the minute you pick up the camera, the person changes their behavior. And this year I've started a new project with my students where we study daguerreotypes, and then I have them take their cell phone out and make a cell phone daguerreotype. The parameters are they have to hold the camera low, straight on, symmetrical composition. They can't push the button or the screen, tap on that image until the subject has stood there for at least 30 seconds. Slow that process down. And what's amazing is they make some of the most powerful images that they've ever made on their cell phone because they slowed down. I will take just a moment. Damon Winters, actually, I just remembered who it was. There we go. Now, what's interesting about this image, very controversial, this is one of my favorite images that he made in our war zone recently. He processed these images. That's the other thing about digital photography and iPhone photography, and in fact, one of the features of Instagram that's most valued is the ability to quickly process the image through some sort of filter, right? So these images Damon Winters made and published were controversial because they all were cast with a green cast reminiscent of Vietnam. And yet he also made these images, they're very intimate. I mean, that's just such a powerful image, right? Done with a cell phone. So my goal isn't to villainize the technology. My goal is to illuminate the use of that technology for recognize the intention in it. And yeah, very powerful body of work. So, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You finished?
Oh, we do? Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I was thinking about a building.
Ask questions or comments. Such a wonderful talk. Can I ask you?
Sure, yeah.
I remember you have a word that says the essence of photography is death.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate a little bit more? What does that mean?
Well, I will tell you that I believe that if you sit still long enough, you can actually feel the Earth's rotation. Everything is in constant movement. Everything's about change. The unique aspect of photography is its indexicality, that every photograph is generally captured in a fraction of a second. And if I'm photographing right now with the wind blowing, the image I make successfully afterwards will be dramatically different. One of the ways I actually get that across to my students is there's a scene in the movie Smoke. And we won't play the whole thing. Oh, that's too bad.
Oh yeah.
I'll turn the volume down so I can keep talking. If it'll start playing. Yeah, there we go. How do I turn the volume? There we go. So there's this poignant scene where Augie's sharing these photographs that he makes at the same time of day at the same exact location every day for like the last 4 years. And William Hurt's character said, but they're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, no, you're going to need to slow down, you're going to miss it. Every day the weather's different, every day the people walking by are different. Sometimes it's the same person, but they're wearing something different. Photography is essentially that moment is a discrete parcel of time that is no longer. So the power of the photograph of a person is based upon the knowledge that that person will die or has already died. Have you noticed that our memory, our visual memory is very limited, and yet photographs grow in value. People buy antique photographs of strangers at thrift stores because they're so interested in the details that emerge, or the buttons, the fashion style, the location, that it starts to enhance, because guess what? Even your vacation photos, you don't remember very much of the details. And that's what photography is about. You notice those two paintings, the difference in the two paintings, one with optics, one wasn't with optics, was the level of detail. Because the human mind has very limited bandwidth, frankly. And in fact, our visual system is very much guided by our attention. Whereas the camera records all these facts. And we get to see in more detail. Ultimately, at the end of the scene, it's rather poignant because he sees an image of his deceased wife, and it just slays him. And the idea of the essence of photography being death is not original. It actually is Roland Barthes, the French literary critic, who was trying to find the perfect likeness of his mother who had passed. And what he found in his examination, the image that he found to be the most powerful was more like the daguerreotype, in that the stillness is what causes us to contain the fullness of our emotion, as opposed to the it's candid snapshot. That is a release rather than a composure of containing. And so that image of Alexander Gardner, the young man who's about ready to be executed, is magical as much because of the fact that we know what happens, right? What's interesting about photography too, and I write about in my journal, is every photograph is like a short story, but you're stuck in the middle. As a viewer, you have to bring the beginning and the ending, and yet we know something comes after that image. Whereas we can go through life and just kind of operate in the middle of our universe, and I like to think of it as when Bambi meets Godzilla. We operate on our own bliss until, bam, something happens. But a photograph is a way of recording that. You've seen that movie, haven't you? Love that film.
Wow.
I get my students thinking about the difference between top-down and bottom-up thinking. Right?
And so oftentimes the challenge with photography is the absence of the balance of the two types of thinking. You know, students don't, in commercial photography, they have to develop a style, and that only happens when they stop referencing other work and they start emerging. We start dealing with issues of creativity, which deals with originality, which is the frequency and intensity of life experiences, spontaneity, the ability to master the tools to the point of not thinking about it so they can react, and then finally the creative act of juxtaposition of binary opposites of elements, whether it's light and dark, whether it's young old. It's this idea of how do we rearrange something into something new. And with photography, everything's infinitely new. Even among portraits, the style and the clothing always changes, even though it recycles about every 30 years. Loved watching my son go to senior prom with those nice 1980s teal blue tux out there. I mean, like, wow, you know.
Did you say you want to see how, like, publishing in motivating student success in the classroom? So
there's something really happening. So I publish students' work a variety of ways. So the most recent is taking their scholarship, their research, and building a publication, sharing that. But also, we go through a process of, let's see here. Making students aware of who they are and being able to talk about it. This eventually show up. So I publish student work on a program blog. I also have students that publish their own blogs. Their internet is slowing down, or something's going on with Blogger.
no, it's just building.
Is it? So printed material, book publication, but also using videos and audiovisual slideshows. I have students start to tell their story. They're constructing a story, a narrative, visually through their work, but also through their words. It's not responding. Oh, interesting. And maybe I don't know.
Sometimes I don't know, like each classroom has different
Yeah.
internet reaction.
Well, some of you may have seen some of the work that our students did with the poetry class last quarter, where we do integrated assignments with other classes and build video presentations as well. Really not sure what's going on with the website. So now we are having technical difficulties. Well, let's see.
So,
I have a short story of how you're changing the way students think.
That's
One
right.
of my students.
Well, the 4,000 pictures at the same place. The corner of 3rd Street, 7th Avenue, at 8 o'clock in the morning. 4,000 straight days and all kinds of weather.
where is that?
That's why I can never take a vacation. I gotta be in my spot every morning at the same time. Every morning in the same spot at the same time.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, on campus, they just have that little outline image, and she didn't like that. She thought I should have my likeness on there. And she said, well, I'll bring in my camera and help me with that. And I said, well, why don't you just pull out your cell phone and snap a pics? And she's like, ooh, you'd be in trouble if you say that. I was innocent completely. I'm like, what do you mean? I will bring in my camera because I create photography. I don't take pics.
I've been known, if you've ever seen the old show Paper Chase with the law professor, Professor Kingsfield, who says, you come in here with minds filled with mush and you leave here thinking like lawyers. I am a stickler about vocabulary with my students because they need to understand how are they going to generate added value to their work. One of the ways is how they talk about it with respect. Now, there's a day that you could talk about pictures, right? Those days, photographs are buried at Costco in 4x6 glossy prints. They're buried in Flickr. Nobody gets paid on Flickr. Nobody gets paid for posting a ton of photos on Facebook. So if you want to get paid and make a career out of photography, you're going to have to distinguish your work from it's a product that has an oversupply for a limited demand. So one of the ways you create demand is how you talk about it, how you educate and become an expert in your field. One of the ways that the business model is to become a teacher of photography. Teach your clients what goes into it so they can appreciate it, because they don't have the literacy of understanding. They just do it. They do it automatically. And in fact, part of the argument today that I'm making, through that advertising, we teach people how to make more of the same thing. By posting a photo on Facebook where the only comment I can get primarily is a thumbs up,
Yeah.
I am building a Pavlovian response to kitty cat and sunset photos. And I will do more of that as opposed to express something authentic. And that's the challenge, is to get people to get past that cloud of distraction. Thanks. Here's a little capillary technique there.
What is your first photo that you took? Like, when was it, and what was it about? Do you still remember?
So I've been around photography all my life. My father was a photographer. We actually lived illegally in the back of his camera repair shop in LA for a year while my parents saved up for their first house. And there's photos of me taking apart cameras when I was 5 years old.
5 years old?
Yeah. And in fact, if you look at my personal work, you'll notice it's primarily black and white photography. Even though I do color photography for clients, I am drawn to black and white photography. And that goes back to an early childhood with earaches. My mother would stay up late and let me watch all these old black and white movies. And from John Ford movies, I thought I knew what it meant to be a young man in our culture. I call it kind of the Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck kind of type of viewpoint. And moving from LA to Spokane certainly felt like a Grapes of Wrath type journey. And then when I look around our local community, it's a very interesting community visually. It's a very interesting place. In fact, I spoke last week at SFCC for a panel discussion. There's an exhibit over there that looks at Spokane as text, and from a photographer's perspective, I'm part of a group exhibit there as well. So, yeah, it's just something I've been around my entire life. My first meaningful photograph, Ansel Adams said if he ended his career with 10 meaningful photographs, he was a success. I made my first one in 1989. And it took about 20 years to figure out what I did right. And it's only been recently that I've been feeling like I can recreate that on a more consistent basis.
What was that image?
It was an image. I think I might even have it on here. It's one of my all-time favorites.
It was in your show last year, wasn't it?
It was, as a matter of fact. It was an old man down in front of the Masonic Temple. I don't have it here. Yeah. And what was interesting about that is the gentleman asked me for a light, and I didn't have. I gave him a lighter, and he went and sat down. And the image I was about to make became magic. I was just going to photograph the architecture, a park bench, and a tree framing it. And it was going to be this nice scenic photo. And then the man sat down, and he's sitting there with his stubby cigarette. And I go, that's it. And for me, two things had to happen for me to start making images I was proud of. One was that man had to sit in the scene and realize that the human interaction with the environment was more important to me. And the other was I was making a photograph, and because of Ansel Adams and the image of Yosemite with the red filter that made everything look so dramatic, I started making every black and white photograph with a red filter, and they were terrible. one day there was a gust of wind as I was pulling my filter out, and I blew it out of my hand, down the street, and it was gone forever. Best day of my career. Because I didn't understand, I was following a recipe. And this is a big issue that I'm talking to students about all the time is, you know what, I'm trying to teach them how to solve unscripted problems. Because I've been there. The script, the recipe was to make an image like Ansel Adams, use a Kodak red filter. The reality is, you look around here, what do we have? We have evergreen trees. What does a red filter do? It makes those green trees go black. What is the shade like? Blue. What happens with that red filter? It makes it go black. You look at that image of Ansel Adams, it's above the tree line, and it's a granite monolith that has equal amounts of red, green, and blue light reflecting off of it. He was able to make that image because he understood the filter in relation to the environment. I just got the first part, which was cool filter effect. So since then, I've been on a quest to try to understand what it is I'm doing with photography, and had to let go of trying to be aspired to someone else's standards. Now I'm sure we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.